Danger might be closer than you think. Before we begin, like this video, comment where and what time you're watching from, and subscribe for more chilling stories. Now turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let's dive into the unknown. Story 1. I moved into this apartment about 3 months ago. Rent in my city is ridiculous, and when I found a decent place in a good location for a fair price, I didn't hesitate. My roommate, James, seemed nice, quiet, clean, and respectful. He had already been living there for a while, and we barely interacted beyond small talk in the kitchen. To be honest, I was fine with that. I wasn't looking for a best friend, just someone who paid their half of the rent and didn't leave dirty dishes in the sink. For the first few weeks, everything seemed normal. At least, I thought it was. James worked from home, so I figured he had an odd schedule. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night for a glass of water and see the glow of his computer screen under his door. No big deal, some people are just night owls. But then, I started to notice something strange. No matter what time I woke up, midnight, 2 a.m., even 4 a.m., James was always awake. I mean, always. Sitting at the kitchen table. Standing in the dark hallway. Once, just sitting on the couch doing nothing. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he had insomnia, maybe he was just restless. But the more I noticed it, the more it unsettled me. It wasn't just that he was awake, it was how he was awake. He didn't watch TV, he didn't scroll on his phone, he didn't even read. He just sat there staring. Sometimes at the floor, sometimes at the wall, sometimes at my bedroom door. The night it really hit me that something was wrong was when I woke up at around 3 a.m. to use the bathroom. As I stepped out of my room, I nearly jumped out of my skin. James was standing in the hallway, completely still, facing my door. No phone, no book, nothing in his hands. Just standing there in the dark, as if he had been waiting for me to come out. I froze. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing. I was half asleep, groggy, and for a split second, I thought maybe he had just been walking by at the exact moment I opened the door. But he wasn't moving. He wasn't even blinking. He was just standing there, barefoot in his usual sweatpants and t-shirt, eyes locked on my door like he had been staring at it for hours. I forced myself to act normal. Couldn't sleep? My voice came out weird, shaky. James tilted his head slightly like he was thinking about the question. Then, after a few seconds of silence, he just turned around and walked away. No response, no expression. Just slow, deliberate steps back toward the living room. I stood there, heart pounding, listening as he sat down on the couch. Not turning on the TV, not grabbing his phone, just sitting. I went to the bathroom, but the whole time I felt like I was being watched. Even though he was out of sight, I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew exactly what I was doing. When I came out, I peeked into the living room. Sure enough, James was sitting on the couch, in the dark, staring at the blank TV screen. His posture was rigid, like he was forcing himself to sit still. I went back to my room and locked the door. I told myself I was overreacting, but I barely slept after that. Every little noise made my skin crawl. At one point, I thought I heard something lightly tap against my door. Just once. Soft enough that I almost convinced myself I imagined it. Almost. The next morning, I left my room early, hoping to shake off the weirdness from the night before. James was already in the kitchen, standing by the sink, staring out the window. He didn't acknowledge me when I walked in, didn't even turn his head. It was like he was completely zoned out. I hesitated for a second before clearing my throat. Morning. Slowly, he turned his head toward me, too slowly, like he had to remember how to move. His eyes locked onto mine for a moment, and then, that same slight head tilt, like he was studying me. It felt like he was expecting something, waiting for me to say the right thing. But I had nothing. I grabbed my coffee and practically fled. Back to my room. That was the day I decided I had to move out. I didn't care about breaking the lease, I just knew I couldn't stay there. I avoided him as much as possible, kept my door locked at all times. But on my last night in the apartment, I woke up one final time, 3:37 a.m. The air in my room felt heavy, like someone else was in there with me. My heart started pounding, and then I heard breathing. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe myself. I just listened. It was right outside my door. Shallow, steady breathing, like someone just standing there waiting. After what felt like an eternity, it finally stopped. No footsteps, no door creaking, just silence. The next morning, I packed my things and left without a word. James didn't say anything. He just stood in the hallway watching me go. And to this day, I still don't know if he ever slept. Story 2. When I finally found a room for rent, it was a relief. The city was too expensive and sharing an apartment was my only option. The UIDY. Landlord, Margaret, was a quiet but polite older woman in her early 60s. She had an old-fashioned way of speaking, always well-dressed, and had a strict but calm demeanor. Besides me, there was only one other tenant, her niece, who Margaret said worked night shifts and slept during the day. You probably won't ever see her, but please don't make too much noise in the morning. That sounded fine to me. Fewer interactions meant fewer problems. The only weird thing was that the niece's room was always locked. I mean, always. Not just casually closed, it had a deadbolt like someone was trying to keep something in or out. At first, I didn't think much of it, but over time I started noticing strange things. I never saw her leave. I never heard footsteps coming from her room, but some nights I would wake up to sounds coming from behind the door. At first, I chalked it up to my imagination. Old apartments creak, right? But then the noises got clearer. It wasn't just random shifting sounds. I heard soft crying, the scrape of fingernails against the wood. Once, when I got up to use the bathroom, I could have sworn I heard a whisper. Not words, just murmuring, low and shaky, like someone trying not to be heard. One night, curiosity got the best of me. I stood in the hallway for a minute, listening, waiting to see if I'd hear it again. The apartment was silent. I don't know why I did it, but I knocked on the door. Just once, lightly. The second my knuckles touched the wood, something knocked back. I backed away so fast I nearly tripped over myself. My heart was pounding in my throat. That knock, it wasn't hesitant, it wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, immediate, like whoever or whatever was inside had been listening. I stood there, frozen, waiting for something else. A voice, another sound. But after that single knock, the room went completely silent. No crying, no scratching, just nothing. I forced myself to breathe, convinced I was overreacting. Maybe the niece was actually in there, and I had just never noticed her coming and going. That had to be it. But something in my gut told me that wasn't the case. The next morning, I casually asked Margaret about her niece. "Is she okay? I think I heard her last night." Margaret's expression didn't change, but I saw the faintest flicker of something in her eyes. "She's fine," she said quickly, almost too quickly. Then she changed the subject. I let it go, but after that I couldn't stop thinking about it. A few nights later, Margaret left the apartment in a rush, muttering something about a last-minute errand. As soon as I heard the door lock behind her, I made up my mind. I needed to know what was inside that room. The hairs on my arms stood up as I reached for the door handle. Locked, as always. But then I noticed something. Margaret had left her bedroom door open, and hanging on the wall, right by her dresser, was a set of spare keys. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the keys from the hook. They felt heavy, cold, like I was holding something forbidden. I stood in front of that locked door for what felt like forever, trying to convince myself to just leave it alone. But I had to know. I placed the key in the lock, and with a deep breath, I turned it. The bolt clicked loudly, echoing in the silence. Slowly, I pushed the door open, not knowing what to expect, but preparing myself for the worst. The first thing that hit me was the smell. A sharp, sickly sweet odor mixed with the unmistakable scent of disinfectant. My stomach churned instantly. The room was dark, the curtains drawn tightly shut, with only a thin line of moonlight filtering through a crack. As my eyes adjusted, I saw something that made every muscle in my body tense. The walls were covered in scratch marks, deep grooves gouged into the plaster, as if someone had desperately tried to escape. On the bed, sheets twisted and stained, sat a pile of old clothes, but no sign of Margaret's niece. Then I noticed the photos. They were pinned to a corkboard above a small, dusty desk. My breath caught when I realized every single picture was of me. Images taken without my knowledge. Me cooking dinner, leaving for work, even sleeping. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear myself think. I backed out of the room, dropping the keys onto the floor in shock. Just then, I heard the front door unlocking. Margaret was back. Panic surged through me as I rushed out of the room, carefully locking the door behind me and returning the keys exactly where I'd found them. I moved out the very next day, without ever confronting Margaret about what I had seen. I still don't know what happened to her niece, or if she ever really existed at all. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if Margaret has noticed that I found out her secret, or worse, if she planned for me to find it all along. Either way, I'm glad I never stayed to find out what she was planning next. Story 3. When I found this apartment online, I couldn't believe how cheap it was. I was a bit skeptical, to be honest. It wasn't the nicest place I'd seen. Walls were a bit scuffed, the furniture was outdated, but it was clean enough, affordable, and close to campus. My roommate Tom seemed pretty normal. He was quiet, kind of reserved, always polite, but he kept to himself most of the time, which suited me perfectly. Everything felt fine for a few weeks, until I started noticing things. It was subtle at first. I kept getting that weird feeling you get when someone's watching you, but when I'd turn around, no one was ever there. I figured it was just stress, or being tired from classes. Then one night, while I was grabbing a snack from the fridge, I noticed a tiny red glow in the air vent above the kitchen counter. At first, I thought it was a reflection or maybe a router light, but the closer I looked, the more it seemed out of place. It wasn't blinking like a router or smoke detector. It was steady, tiny, and red. Curiosity got the better of me, and I grabbed a chair to get a closer look. As soon as I peered inside, my blood ran cold. It was unmistakable. There was a small camera lens pointed directly down at me. My stomach instantly twisted into knots. I felt sick, confused, and angry. Who put that there? Who'd been watching me? My mind raced through scenarios, desperately looking for a logical explanation. But deep down, I knew this wasn't right. Someone had intentionally hidden it there. Trying to keep calm, I started checking the rest of the apartment. My heart sank further with each discovery. Another camera in the smoke detector above my bed. One hidden behind a small gap in the bookshelf in the living room, perfectly angled toward the couch. I even found a camera tucked discreetly into a small gap near the showerhead in the bathroom. I felt sick to my stomach. Who would do something like this? The answer seemed obvious, yet impossible. Only 2 people had keys to this apartment, me and my roommate. My heart was pounding out of my chest. I didn't know what to do first, call the police, confront Tom, or just grab my stuff and leave. But leaving felt wrong, like I'd be letting him get away with it. Tom always seemed so harmless, quiet, friendly, the type of guy you'd never suspect. But the longer I thought about it, the more his behavior seemed off. The way he'd ask me about my schedule, how he'd casually mention things I'd done alone, as if he'd been paying closer attention than I realized. After pacing around the apartment for a few minutes, trying to think clearly, I heard the front door unlock. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. Tom walked in carrying groceries, completely unaware I'd discovered anything. My palms were sweating, my heart pounding, but I forced myself to act casual. I knew I needed more proof, something solid so he couldn't deny it. I quietly went to my room, locked the door behind me, and started searching online for what to do in these situations. The search results made me feel even worse. Countless stories popped up about hidden cameras and roommates secretly spying. My stomach churned, imagining how many times he'd watched me without my knowledge. After a few minutes, I heard Tom walk toward the kitchen, open the fridge, and start humming softly, like everything was completely normal. My mind raced. Was he just casually living his life while secretly filming every private moment? I felt violated, disgusted, and terrified. How could I have missed this? Finally, my adrenaline took over. I grabbed my phone, texted a friend to meet me downstairs, and quietly stuffed some essentials into a backpack. I walked out, avoiding Tom completely, barely mumbling that I was going to study. He smiled, unaware. I never went back there after that night. I called the police anonymously from my friend's place. They searched the apartment and found even more hidden cameras, but Tom had already vanished. To this day, I have no idea where he went or if he ever got caught. and that's what scares me the most. Story 4. When I first moved into the shared house, it honestly seemed like a great deal. It was spacious, had a decent kitchen, and was super close to work. The other two roommates, Sarah and John, were friendly enough, and we clicked right away. But there was something off about the room at the end of the hall. When I asked about it, they said it belonged to a guy named Ethan, who mostly kept to himself. "He's quiet," Sarah said casually. "You'll probably never even meet him." I took her word for it, thinking nothing more of it at first. But soon, I started noticing that Ethan wasn't just quiet. He was practically invisible. He never seemed to eat in the kitchen, never showered in the shared bathroom, never came out during the day at all. But at night, it was a different story. Almost every night around 2 a.m., I'd wake up to hear his bedroom door slowly creak open. Then footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate, moving up and down the hall, outside my door. At first, I told myself he probably just worked odd hours and was trying not to disturb us. But the longer it went on, the weirder it felt. One night, when the footsteps paused right outside my door, I quietly climbed out of bed and peered through the crack underneath. There I saw a shadow just standing still, motionless, as if whoever it was listening for something. It stayed like that for a long time, too long. It didn't feel normal. It didn't feel right. I mentioned it to Sarah the next morning, and I saw something flicker across her face. She looked at me weirdly, like she was trying to decide what to say. Then, after an awkward pause, she said something that made my heart sink. "Ethan moved out months ago. No one lives in that room anymore." My blood went cold. "Then who was walking in the hall last night?" I asked, trying not to panic. Sarah just shook her head and avoided my eyes, clearly uncomfortable, but she didn't say another word about it. After that conversation with Sarah, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I felt on edge every night, waiting for the footsteps to start again. For a few nights, everything stayed quiet, and I started to relax, convincing myself I'd just imagined things. But then, exactly 1 week after Sarah told me the room was empty, I woke up again. This time, it wasn't footsteps. It was a slow, scratching noise coming from down the hall, like someone gently dragging their nails across the wooden door. I got up slowly, my heart hammering, telling myself I had to know for sure. I quietly opened my bedroom door, peeking out into the dim hallway. At first, I didn't see anything. The scratching stopped immediately, leaving nothing but silence. But then my eyes adjusted, and I could have sworn the door at the end of the hall moved slightly, like someone had just leaned against it from the inside. I felt my stomach tighten. I told myself to just go back to bed, but something made me walk towards it. When I reached Ethan's old room, I put my hand against the door. It was ice cold, colder than any other surface in the house, even though the hallway was warm. My skin crawled, but I forced myself to push it open. The room was empty, completely empty. No furniture, no curtains, just bare walls, cold air, and a thick layer of dust on the floor. But there, in the dust, clearly visible, were fresh footprints leading from the doorway to the middle of the room, where they simply stopped. There were no footprints coming back. But I couldn't explain it then, and I still can't now. After that night, I decided to move out immediately. Sarah and John avoided talking about the room entirely, acting like nothing had happened. To this day, I don't know who or what was pacing that hallway every night, or leaving marks behind that couldn't possibly be there. I've never believed in anything paranormal, but when I think about that empty room, the footsteps, the shadow standing outside my door, honestly, I still get chills. Story 5. When I first met Chris, I genuinely thought I'd hit the roommate jackpot. He was friendly, neat, paid the rent on time, and never argued about chores. Compared to the disasters I'd dealt with in the past, this guy seemed almost unreal. But looking back now, maybe that was the problem. He was just too perfect. He had no temper, no mood swings, and his life seemed weirdly empty. He never mentioned family or friends. He never got phone calls or had visitors over. It was as if he didn't have a past. At first, I didn't think much of it. Who was I to judge someone for being quiet or private? But soon, little things started to feel off. Chris began dressing similarly to me, wearing clothes almost identical to mine, same colors, same style, sometimes even brands. I figured he was just influenced by being around me, Or maybe it was just coincidence. But then it wasn't just the clothes. I started noticing he'd mimic the way I talked, using my favorite expressions, my jokes, even my mannerisms. It was subtle at first, but after a while I couldn't ignore it. Things took a darker turn one night when I got home late from work. As I quietly entered the apartment, I heard Chris talking softly in his room. I assumed he was on the phone, but when I got closer I realized he was speaking to himself, practicing different laughs, different reactions, changing his tone repeatedly as if rehearsing a conversation. It gave me goosebumps. Who does something like that? It didn't feel normal. I hurried to my room, closing the door as silently as possible, hoping he didn't hear me. The next day, while Chris was out, I couldn't resist taking a quick look in his room. I just wanted peace of mind, some kind of reassurance that I was overthinking everything. But what I found made my blood run cold. There were notebooks stacked neatly on his desk, dozens of them. When I opened the first one, my heart dropped. Every page was filled with notes about me, my eating habits, my favorite TV shows, my childhood memories I'd casually shared with him, and disturbingly detailed observations about my reactions to everyday situations. It felt like he was literally trying to become me. I felt sick flipping through those pages. There were detailed descriptions of my facial expressions, notes on how I smiled, how I frowned, even how my voice changed pitch when I was nervous. My stomach churned as I saw he'd also written down exactly what I did after work every day, like he'd memorized my schedule down to the minute. It wasn't admiration, it felt invasive, obsessive, almost threatening. I put the notebook back exactly how I found it and quickly left the room, heart racing. When Chris came home that evening, I tried my best to act normal, but I couldn't look him in the eye. He acted completely calm, smiling and greeting me casually like always, totally unaware I'd discovered his secret. But now every friendly gesture felt calculated, every smile fake. I started locking my bedroom door at night, paranoid he might try something. I barely slept anymore, constantly listening for any sign he was coming closer. Then, just as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. One morning, I woke up and realized Chris hadn't come home the night before. All his things were still there, his clothes, his toothbrush, even those creepy notebooks, but he never returned. Days went by, then weeks. I eventually called the landlord, but he had no idea where Chris had gone. No note, no explanation. It was as if he'd simply disappeared. It's been months and I still haven't heard from Chris or gotten any answers. Sometimes I still wake up at night feeling like he's nearby, still watching, still taking notes. Maybe he's out there somewhere, mimicking someone else. Or maybe he's still watching me, waiting. Either way, I can't shake the feeling I'll see him again someday, probably when I least expect it. Story 6. When I first rented the studio apartment, I honestly thought I'd found the perfect spot. Sure, the building was older and a bit worn down, but the rent was incredibly cheap and it was close to my job. The landlord, Mr. Thompson, was an elderly guy in his 70s who seemed friendly enough, maybe a little too friendly at times. He insisted on doing what he called routine checkups every week. At first, it didn't seem too weird. Maybe he was just cautious about his property. But after a few weeks, I started noticing small things out of place. It was subtle, like I'd come home and my mail would be neatly stacked on the kitchen counter, even though I'd left it scattered on the table. Once, I swear my closet door was slightly ajar when I always closed it. Each time something like that happened, I convinced myself I was just tired or forgetful, but a nagging feeling kept growing, that someone was coming into my apartment when I wasn't there. The feeling became impossible to ignore one morning when I woke up and found one of my dresser drawers partially open. I never leave them open. I'm almost obsessively tidy about it. I started feeling anxious, paranoid even. Was Mr. Thompson snooping around during his checkups? He always knocked and waited politely when I was home, so it didn't seem to fit. Maybe I was just losing my mind, but something definitely wasn't right. Finally, I decided I had to find out the truth. One evening, instead of heading out after telling Mr. Thompson I'd be gone for a few hours, I quietly stayed behind, hiding in the closet, near the front door. My heart pounded as I waited, hoping I was just imagining everything. About 20 minutes later, my blood ran cold when I heard the faint sound of keys jingling in the lock. The door slowly opened, and through the slats in the closet door, I saw Mr. Thompson step inside, quietly shutting the door behind him. I held my breath as I watched him through the slats in the closet door. Mr. Thompson stood still for a moment, listening, as if to make sure I was really gone. Then, quietly and methodically, he started walking around the apartment, opening drawers and cabinets. My pulse was racing so fast I was scared he might hear my heartbeat. He moved toward my bed, carefully lifting the pillow, running his hands over the sheets. It was as if he was searching for something specific, or maybe just memorizing exactly how I'd left everything. Just when I thought it couldn't get more unsettling, he suddenly moved toward my laundry basket. With slow, deliberate movements, he carefully pulled out one of my shirts, held it up and brought it to his face. My stomach turned as he inhaled deeply, eyes closed, like he was savoring it. I felt sick watching this unfold, powerless to do anything without revealing myself. He stayed there, holding my shirt for what felt like forever, and then carefully folded it and placed it back, perfectly aligned with the others. I stayed hidden in that closet long after Mr. Thompson left, too scared to move. Eventually, I stepped out, feeling shaken and violated. I knew immediately I couldn't stay there another night. I quietly packed a bag with essentials and left, staying at a friend's place that night. When I finally confronted Mr. Thompson the next day over the phone, he simply denied everything, calling me confused and paranoid. He sounded calm, almost amused, like this wasn't new for him at all. I broke the lease immediately and moved across town, even though it cost me money I didn't have. To this day, the thought of what Mr. Thompson was doing and how many times he'd done it before still creeps me out. He never faced any consequences. As far as I know, he's still renting out apartments. Sometimes I wonder how many other tenants he's watched and whether he's still secretly entering their homes while they're away, doing whatever it is he's looking for. Story 7. When I moved into the dorm, I wasn't expecting much. Just a standard college setup, tiny rooms, communal bathrooms, and roommates who either became your best friends or people you quietly tolerated until graduation. My roommate Emily seemed nice enough, though from day one I noticed something a little weird. She always locked our bedroom door. And I mean always, even if she was just sitting inside doing homework. I figured it was just a privacy thing, so I didn't push it. After a few weeks, though, it started feeling strange. I'd never actually see her entering or leaving the room. I'd go to class, she'd be inside. I'd come home, she'd still be inside. Door always shut, always locked. Sometimes I'd even knock, trying to offer food or just chat, but she'd never open it completely. She'd just crack the door slightly, peek out, and quietly say, "I'm fine, thanks." It made me uncomfortable, but I still figured she was just shy. But soon the weirdness escalated. One evening I knew for sure she was working the night shift at the campus library. She'd texted me earlier saying she'd be back around 3 a.m. Around midnight, though, while I was half asleep, I suddenly heard clear, distinct movement coming from her locked room. My heart started racing immediately. I knew it couldn't be her. I had double-checked the apartment, and nobody else had keys. At first I rationalized it. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe she'd left the window open and a draft had moved something. But then I heard something else. A long, slow exhale, clearly audible through the thin dorm walls. It wasn't imagination. Someone was definitely breathing in. There, quietly, carefully, like whoever was inside didn't want me to notice. But I heard every breath deep and steady, chillingly calm. My first instinct was to call my roommate, just to confirm that I wasn't imagining things. But she didn't answer her phone. I kept calling repeatedly, anxiety building each time it went straight to voicemail. Meanwhile, whoever, or whatever, was behind that locked door continued moving around. It wasn't loud, just subtle shuffling and gentle footsteps, as if pacing slowly back and forth. Each step sent another shiver down my spine, but I couldn't bring myself to confront whoever was inside. Instead, I just sat frozen on my bed, heart pounding, waiting for the noises to stop. They eventually did, just around the time my roommate texted saying she was on her way home. I was still terrified, but felt a bit relieved. At least she'd be there soon. When she finally arrived, she opened the locked door casually, like nothing had happened. I carefully glanced. Inside, as the door swung open, there was no one there, Just a neatly made bed and a desk covered in books. Nothing looked disturbed, but the window was tightly shut and there was no other way someone could have gotten in or out. I couldn't explain it, but I knew what I'd heard was real. The next morning, I cautiously asked her if she'd heard anything weird lately. She looked confused at first, but then her expression shifted, almost defensive. She shrugged it off, saying, "Old buildings make weird noises, right?" But I could tell she was nervous. Her eyes darted away as she spoke, and she quickly changed the subject. After that night, though, the strange sounds stopped completely. No footsteps, no breathing, nothing. As if whoever had been there decided to leave just as suddenly as they'd appeared. I never got answers, and eventually, I just gave up looking for them. My roommate moved out a few weeks later without much explanation, and I never saw her again. Maybe she knew something. Maybe she was scared too. All I know is whatever was in that room never returned after she left. To this day, I still don't understand what happened or who was behind that door that night, but I'll never forget the quiet, steady breathing from the other side, and the chilling feeling of being watched by someone who shouldn't have been there.